Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I am very excited to be here today because not only are we doing another celebration video of the 85th anniversary of Batman, but I have two of the best people that I could ever ask for in regards to having an amazing comic book slash pop culture conversation with. Andy, Cammy, I know it's been a crazy couple of days, but I'm hoping that this is going to calm everybody down and just let everybody forget about the real world as we always try to do from time to time.
Happy to be here. Really like this story and really excited to talk.
Yes,
Yeah.
same here.
Yeah, so we're doing another episode of Who Wore It Best, the celebrating of Batman. And I'm actually very excited about this one because this is a story that I've been looking forward to discussing with you guys for such a long time. And more importantly, it's nice because of the fact that it actually has a movie pairing. And the movie that we're going to be comparing the original work to happens to be my all-time favorite animated Batman film, also maybe one of my favorite Batman films in general. So the story that we're going to be talking about is Batman Under the Red Hood. It was a story that came out back in the mid 2000s, a story that truly shocked the world of comics, seeing the return of a character long since people thought gone. And then, of course, we get a couple years later from the same author, Judd Winnick. He wrote the script for the installment of the film Batman Under the Red Hood in the DC Animation Universe Library. So, as they say in the world of Bob's, let's dare to compare.
I can kick it off for a second just to say broadly, I'm really happy to have done this so people know my history with it. I watched the film when did it come out? Okay, 2010 looks like.
Right, 2010. So, okay, there you go.
Yeah,
So,
okay. So that makes sense.
So basically 5 years after the book came out.
Yeah, so 2010. So I watched this. I had already gotten like kind of back into comics after having like read a bunch of stuff in college and catching up a little with some of the big stories I'd missed. And I watched this before reading the comic, and it would have been not long after this came out. I had a roommate in college who was really, really deep into comics. And when this came out, he was really excited about it. And so I guess I watched it with him not long after it came out. So I really enjoyed it when I watched the movie, and I still enjoy it now. But then I read the comic second years later. So there was a gap. And so right now, watching it and reading it is the first time I've done the two together. But just so people kind of know where I'm coming from, this is one of the really few occasions where I watched the thing before I read the thing, which is usually not the case on this channel.
Yeah, for me, I did watch the movie when it first came out because I was very much hell-bent on collecting these animated films. They were basically my comic books at the time because I had not gotten back into comic books. It was going to be 19 years after the movie came out, which is kind of crazy to say. But I love the movie, even though I didn't read the book, but I'm always interested in the Batman lore. And of course, one of the few things that I did say was, as I was actually watching more of these DC Universe films, I was saying one of these days I'm going to get back into comics and I'm going to do a lot of catch up. This is actually one of the few times where I was unable to get my hands on the floppies. I actually bought the trade because the first appearance of the Red Hood is a crazy expensive comic. It is crazy to see how much that book is worth. So finally got around to reading it for the purposes of this video, which is another reason why I'm glad we have this channel, because it gives me the incentive to read things. And I was really curious to see if I was actually going to think that this original source material was going to be better than the film. I had high hopes just because of the fact that we had the same writer for both pieces, Judd Winnick. He's a great writer. As a matter of fact, Andy, on our road to Blackest Night, we will read a little bit of Green Lantern that is written by John Winnick. Very important piece to read.
Looking forward to
So
that.
Brandon Vietti is also a very good director. He's also done a little bit of comic writing himself. So you have a good bunch of guys bringing this to life. But of course, you got to always reflect on the source material as well. So now that I've read the book, seen the movie recently, I'm really excited and I have things to say.
So for me, I watched the movie first, and it wasn't very long ago that I watched the movie. I watched it in 2018 when the Batman collection of movies came out for like I don't even know if it was an anniversary collection or what it was. And I just started watching them just to see what I had missed. So I already kind of had it in my mind, obviously, where the story was going. But reading the comic for this discussion was a first for me. There are subtle differences between the movie and the comic. And I am so grateful that I finally read the comic because it's amazing.
I mean, I am going to, of course, sometimes we wait till the end, but I think we also usually give our opinions in the beginning. I
Sometimes
still,
they change.
yeah, I still actually think at this point in time, I will say that the movie is better than the book, but my reasoning is very interesting because I do love the book. I really, really do. It really is about those subtle differences for me personally.
I guess I'll go next, which I thought it's kind of unusual for us to give our thoughts early on. I thought we
We
waited
have
a
a
little
couple
bit.
of times.
But since we're giving our opinions early on, no, hands down, I give it to the comic this time. Obviously, having watched the movie, it seared the image in my mind. And usually for me, I try to avoid that. I always, even when it comes to novels, I try to read before I watch because I don't want someone else to give me an idea of how I should interpret or obviously if there's major differences, I don't want that to overshadow. And then, all I do is think back to the movie. But DC has a really interesting way of doing movies where even if they change things, it doesn't alter your perception of the book when you finally get to it. And for me, immediately upon entering the comic world of this, I was like, ooh, I already like this better. There was just so much happening for me. And there was, I mean, with the introduction of so many characters, which obviously we'll get into, I was just like, yeah, you can't beat this. So hands down for me in this battle, it's the comic.
And then I think, okay, so there's a little bit of balance here in that I think narrowly I pick the comic. I think. I really, really, really like them both. And I came into this thinking it was gonna be like this was going to be the one where I'm like the adaptation is just better than the source material because I had such fond memories of the film. And I still love the film. So it's not a disparaging thing. It's just I think I really love them both. And I think I give the slight edge to the comic. What I will say that I think is probably now weighting it to the comic for me is I don't even think I mentioned this to either of you, but like quietly for the past months, weeks, I don't know, I started reading like my own like essentially ultimate journey of Batman.
Oh,
And I just kind of started with year one and
okay.
then kind of read a lot of like post crisis Batman straight through, like a decent amount. And so I have very fresh in my mind like the introduction of Jason Todd. Um, and so reading stories where like active in the canon is Jason's introduction and like being being Robin and like that's where I'm at in my journey with Batman right now gives an emotional weight to this story that I think the comic captures a little better for someone who is heavily invested in the source material. I think the movie probably works really, really well as what it's intended to be, a nice entryway, a story that anyone can enjoy. And maybe you've read, I mean, you're probably a comic fan, but like you're more likely to have watched a few DC animated movies than you are to be intimately familiar with like the 70s forward of Batman. Um, so that's part of what's coloring my experience here too. And I don't think I've said that on the channel or to you guys. So I wanted to acknowledge that that's kind of part of it. Um, but I also say sometimes our thoughts change because since I feel so strongly about both of these, by the end of the conversation, I could say I like the movie better. I don't know. I mostly my take is these are two wonderful, wonderful stories, and you should enjoy both of them. You really, really should.
Well, you know something, Cammy? You're curious as to why we actually gave our choices at the beginning. I mean, look at what we already got. We don't have a single response here. So this is why I
Well,
think this is important.
you know why I enjoy these conversations? Because a lot of the times you and I, Steve, we will banter back and forth to sometimes a point of impasse, and then Andy will have an epiphany that, oh yeah, I like this more than I like that, and you just reminded me of this. So it's fun to watch the development because it's usually you and I that come in solid. It is very rare. I think I've only seen it once happen in our history that you've changed your mind, Steve. But Andy, sometimes I like to win and I like to lure him to the dark side with my cookies. You know, I'm like, come on, Andy, you know I'm right here. So, you know, it's fun. I enjoy when Andy comes in undecided because I'm like, challenge accepted.
Well, it's very close. It's very close.
Right
So
now he's on
I'm
my
already
side,
leaning
so
your way.
I know.
So so I guess now we officially get into why we feel the way we feel. So the general reason, before I get into any specifics about why I prefer the film over the source material, I don't know if you guys would see this coming, but this is my true and honest thoughts. Source material, it's a great story. It's too big. I like the movie because I think it's a self-contained Batman story. I think that even though each piece in the book is essential for the total story that Judd Winnick was trying to tell, did we really need to go in those specific directions to get to the end game of the story? Judd Winnick himself is behind the wheel in both projects. So the fact that even he took his own work and said, maybe I need to make this a little smaller. Otherwise, I'm going to truly lose my audience, because we also have to take into account that not every DC film watcher or TV spectator out there is a comic book reader.
Right.
So is that person going to truly enjoy that original source material? Because here's just 2 seconds. I'll start this off with the first reason. I love the fact that in the film, we start off at the end of a death in the family. And I'm also very happy that we're talking about Under the Red Hood, because we're not going to be talking about a death in the family on its own this year. It's a great story. We had to make some sacrifices here. But Under the Red Hood gives us the opportunity to bring this story to light. The comic book doesn't start with that. But the comic book didn't need to start with that, because the people who are reading Under the Red Hood have most likely 99.9% of the time read Batman: A Death in the Family, because that's one of the must reads that you are told to go to if you have never picked up a Batman comic before, and then you're told, go read Under the Red Hood. So that's my general and my first specific take.
You couldn't have started at a better original take there, because that's actually quite perfect segue into why I chose the opposite of you. Okay, first and foremost, keep in mind, the movie is called Batman Under the Red Hood. The comic is called Under the Red Hood. There is no bat in that title. So of
True.
course the movie is going to vastly weigh heavily on Batman and his interpretation and his involvement in the story. Whereas Under the Red Hood, you're getting the complexity of it. You're getting every facet, every vantage point to look at why Jason Todd made the decisions that he made to bring us to the point, and why his vengeance and his blood is deep. And for that, that's why I appreciate the comic more than the movie. I felt the movie was extremely fast paced, but as a moviegoer, I understand why that's done. You're not going to captivate an audience. I mean, how many people tell you year after year, I love the Titanic, but holy, shnikes, 3.5 hours is a lot to sit through. And we've seen this time and time again. When you have a movie that surpasses that 2.5 hours, really toying with your audience at that point. You either have to have completely captivated them and they really want to be there, or you have lost them at that point.
Unless it's any extended edition of Lord of the Rings. People will sit through those movies.
We won't talk about the Lord of the Rings because that's a whole other planet. But
literally.
Literally. Yeah. It's a very fine line that you teeter when you have an epic novel or an epic story that you can really condense into a movie version and please both audiences. You are going to have two very different products. But what I can appreciate about this is that we do have the same writer. And so therefore, it's not a pin to the heart because it's something that he agreed, you know what, this is my baby. I'm going to condense it because I want my audience to have a different take and a different feel on it. And I think by having that play on adding the word Batman, that really gave a direct audience. If you are a fan of Batman, I'm going to give you a Batman story. This is how Batman fits into the equation. But the beauty of this is, I mean, he really could have made a whole franchise out of this and focused on different characters. We could have had Black Mask under the Red Hood. We could have had, Nightwing under the Red Hood and saw it from different vantage points and had a ton of different movies. Now, would you have had an audience for that? Maybe, maybe not. And maybe that's why he didn't go in that direction. But DC doesn't always get it right. And I think in this instance, coming in with a shorter, fast-paced film didn't necessarily work for everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was left thinking a lot when I was reading it. Like, I love the comic. It does seem crazy to me that it is an over 300-page volume for this for this story.
But that does comics,
it feels crazy to me, and it's especially spotlighted because, having just talked about Killing Joke on this channel, which is a single issue, with very this cool, deep story that we can go into. And there are admittedly a lot of moments during Under the Red Hood, the comic, where I did find myself thinking, I'm halfway done with with this, even though I love it. And I do think that is something that just comes from the serialized nature of storytelling, from comic to comic, issue to issue, arc to arc, and then packaging it together like this. It still works, but and then the movie does become an edited down version of the story. I think most of what they choose to focus on is appropriate. Obviously, with any book to film comparison, you can obsess over the little changes, the big changes, the things that were left out in the service of what the medium is. Steve, I think that including the key pivotal moment of death in the family in the movie version is a great idea for people who are not intimately familiar with it. But I think being deeper in my journey at this point and seeing the two back to back, to me, I feel that is subtractive to the experience, but that's to me, right? That's not necessarily to every audience goer. So I actually am definitely willing to still put that as a mark and something it does well for what it is. But for me, at the end of the day, I think the reason that the comic edges it out for me is it's really two key emotional moments. Because for me, a lot of what I choose to tune to in the story is what moment resonates with me, what sticks with me, what am I left thinking about and feeling afterwards. And while we have the moment in both, the comic version of Jason saying, it's it's not that you didn't save me, it's that you didn't avenge me. It's like,
Yeah, I want to definitely that's something I definitely want to touch
yeah,
upon in a little bit.
yeah, but that moment, I is what sticks with me. That specific like phrase, right? That moment, and the comic version of it sticks with me. Um, and then also, actually, a lot of Alfred is what lands with me and stays with me from the comic, and specifically, the like small scene of the joy that young Bruce got from having books delivered. That scene in the comic, it stays with me, that like a lot. And when I look back on Red Hood, that's kind of what I am left thinking about. And for me, that's comic, those things. So that's where I land.
I mean, I again, like, I'll defend the death in the family scene, and I think it's just because for film purposes, it's a great way to segue into what the main story truly is about. And you know, it's also the fact that we had not seen, well, no, we did sort of kind of see Jason Todd show up for the first time in Hush in some shape or form, but the real Jason Todd did not show up until this point, and he had not been in the comics for many, many years. I still think that Jason Todd is such a phenomenon in the world of comics because of what we got with Death in the Family, because it was a vote by the comic readers. The comic readers were given a choice. Do you want Jason Todd to live or do you want Jason Todd to die? I find it so interesting that in this year, in 2024, DC has officially opened the vault and basically gave us the story of what if it actually went in the other direction. I think that even
Gets it on the
JMD,
video version though. It's like you can choose your own adventure.
yeah, that's the animated film, but no, they actually made a the whole concept of the facsimile edition, the remastering of an old comic. Well, they actually did something called a faux simile, where they actually took the issue of Batman. There were two versions, if Jason Todd lived or if Jason Todd died. The one where Jason Todd lived was locked in the vaults. They finally gave it to the public. I bought the book because I was curious to see how it ended. And I will say that Jason Todd was better off dead. Just because of what we got further on. And now we even have a mini series being written by J.M.D. Mateus right now called A Death in the Family, Robin Lives. It's a 4-issue mini series of Jason Todd's hell-bent raise on revenge because of what happened to him. So I don't know if it would have been nice to just keep that little mystery locked up in the vaults, but now it's here and it's for everybody to experience. But Death in the Family, if we didn't get Death in the Family, we wouldn't have gotten it. That's just the way that I look at it. And maybe it's just the person in me who appreciates the way that animation, as the late Darwin Cook says, goes in between the panels of the comic book and shows us how we got from point A to point B. I just feel that that brought a little bit more life to the story, not to mention the great voice casting that came with this film, because, up until this point, Kevin Conroy was Batman. There was no other person who you could even think about, even though there had been many other people that had lent their voice to an animated version of Batman. But when they announced that Bruce Greenwood was going to voice Batman, I don't know if you guys know him well, but Bruce Greenwood is one of my all-time favorite character actors. He played the President of the United States in National Treasure, Book of Secrets. If you also know of the movie 13 Days starring Kevin Costner, he played John F. Kennedy beautifully. So he's one of my favorite character actors, and he just stunned me as Batman. Not to mention John DiMaggio, one of the greatest voice actors in modern days, giving us a whole new voice to the Joker. And that was another thing that I absolutely love about this movie.
I have to give it up to Neil Patrick Harris because
we were going to talk about Neil Patrick Harris.
Well, you're giving your nods to actors and voices because based on the comic, I think he nailed the comedic element to a T. There would have been no better voicing for him, I feel, in my opinion. So I just wanted to give him props because I thought he nailed it.
Yeah, because I think what's very interesting about the Nightwing scenes in the book and in the film is we get a little less Nightwing than I think we want in the film, but we do get a little more of Nightwing in the book, but it's, again, to me, I just don't know how he fits towards the end. In the beginning, with the fight with the Mazo, I get it. I love that scene in the animated movie because I just love all the lines that Neil Patrick Harris throws out. Also, the movie has one of Nightwing's greatest lines, and it's not in the comic book. And that scene is not even in the comic book. And that's when they go visit the Joker in Arkham Asylum. And it's the scene where Nightwing goes to Batman. Could you please, for once, say, let's get in the car? Is that so hard? You see, that's another thing I'm glad that Judd Winnick was the writer of this film, because he got to add a couple of things that he didn't get to play with in the comic. And they're done in such good taste.
Yeah, and I will say Nightwing in the comic, it's the thing I always go back to is what lingers with me, right? And there's this brief period early on where we get narration from his perspective that I really, really liked. And in that, it's where he talks about Batman was always so quiet, and like that is another thing that like really lingers with me with the comic, is just this idea of like Nightwing as he grew up and reflects on his time as Robin. He looks at what Batman's silence meant with a level of intimate perspective that I think is really powerful, because it's really interesting to point out, like, Batman is this grim loner figure in a lot of stories, right? And then you also have the Bat family, which, depending on how camp you want to go, can be just a silly thing. But I thought that this was a really, really great, like, down to earth understanding of what that Bat family means to Batman and how it fits in with who he really is. And, it's not, and Alfred talks about it too, not the joy of having a Robin around, but like a quieting of the grief of having Robin around. And I just, Nightwing, limited role, but important role. What lingers with me is that Batman's quiet reflection. And I thought that was, I thought that was brilliant, and just handled really beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, I think another big positive thing about having Nightwing in the story in general is I'm not necessarily sure about the time gap in the comics, but I know that in the film it's 5 years later. So you don't really know.
I think they said 6 in the comic. I don't know why that number is sticking out in my mind. It's probably because I read it really close to the recording.
Yeah. So the wounds are still fresh. But the fact that Nightwing comes back, even though you don't necessarily see it much in the comics or in the movie itself, you can definitely sense, if anything, if you're a fan, you can sense that Batman is somewhat happy about the fact that he's got somebody by his side, even for this brief point in time. Because, Andy, I'm not sure if it was like it in the comics, but I still remember the Batman episode from the animated series Old Wounds, when Dick Grayson actually does not want to be Robin anymore and he becomes Nightwing. I don't know how it went down in the comics, but, the fact that Dick is actually willing to come back to Batman's side after a possible fallout is also a very heartwarming thing to see, because old habits die hard,
No,
And
agreed.
I also
I'll be
like in the
able to
movie.
comment
I
on
also
that when I'm further in my personal journey.
yeah, when I look back at it now, especially since reading the book, the one thing I loved in the film was when Nightwing called Batman boss. There's still that loyalty there.
Well, even on the side of Batman too. I mean, you get that a lot from the comic. You feel like Batman is grappling with grief and sorrow, and he's really kind of going through his choices in his mind as they kind of embark on these back and forth entanglements, and it really feels like Jason is something special to him, even though he knew he was flawed from the beginning, as he kind of goes back and he makes these images, he pieces the puzzle, so to speak, and he kind of tries to justify the behavior and things of that nature and make it all make sense. You kind of sense this true, genuine father-son relationship, and it's very heartwarming and it's very heartbreaking all in the same breath.
Mm-hmm. So there is another dominant figure in this story, and that's Black Mask, the guy who's trying to become the kingpin of Gotham. Now, I will definitely say that I appreciate that the fact that they made Black Mask a little bit more of a threatening character, especially towards the end of the book where he actually goes toe to toe with the heroes. But I'm still going to say that I think compared to the film, I think that his role was a little bit long-winded. Plus, I cannot deny that I love Black Mask in the film because Wade Williams just gives such. You see, in the book, he doesn't seem like much of a hothead. I don't know. Maybe that's just because of the fact that sometimes I have a little bit of a gluttony for punishment, and I like watching people get beat up, especially if they deserve it. But I just that and the voice of Wade Williams just made Black Mask such an enjoyable character in the film as compared to the book.
I think I'd give you that too. I really do like Black Mask in the comic, but not in the way that like I've got like a lot to say or like something that was really impactful or like a great way the character was used. Just in the comic, very much a vehicle like to move the plot forward. But at least in the movie, we get those like big performances that kind of leave it being a real role. But yeah, my main takeaway in the comic, at least, was mostly that he was there to progress plot. Um, I loved a little bit of the foiling that goes on between him and Red Hood, with the various ways that they're making their drug money. But on the whole, when I think of Under the Red Hood, both forms, Black Mask is, and it's funny because of how prominent the character it is, but I place him as a secondary character in a story where he's a pretty main figure.
But I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the delivery of Wade Williams's lines. Like I love because
Yeah.
it's not. This is also a scene that's not in the book. I love the scene when
Yeah.
the new guy comes in and he goes, "You, new guy, you keep staring at me like that. I'm gonna claw your eyes out." Like I just love that. And also, this is the funniest thing while I was reading the book because again, I saw the movie before I read the book. I had no idea that Judd Winnick gender swapped Mr. Lee. And I kind of was a little upset that it wasn't a woman in the book because maybe it's because I'm a big fan of Kelly Hu and I just love the delivery when she goes, "Yes, Batman likes to keep things." I just appreciated the fact that here is this cold as a bone woman who's not even flinching when Black Mask is going off on a tirade. I was like, lady, you've got a pair of brass balls under that skirt of yours. I admire you.
What you just said a few moments ago reminded me of something I read recently about Bruce Lee and that how he studied art and poetry, but instead he decided that the most beautiful form of self-expression was punching people in the face.
You would say that actually.
Yeah, that really stuck with me. But Black Mask happens to be one of my absolute favorites, and I don't feel Birds of Prey did him the justice that he deserves. So I really appreciate him in this franchise, you know, the movie, the book version of Under the Red Hood, because I really feel like he gets to express his true self. He is absolutely sinister. He is completely ruthless. And I love that we got more of him in the comic than we did in the movie. In the movie, I don't feel that he was any less angry. I just don't feel like he was put in the prominence of being a main figure. You know, I mean, he drove the story certainly, but he just didn't have a lot of screen time. Again, though, I credit that to the fact that the movie was so fast paced, you just couldn't get all of the elements of each of these characters. You got so many different sides and stories in the comic version than you did on screen. And I think, again, that tends to reason why I'm so heavily attracted to the comic versus the movie
You know what's
version.
actually interesting is that this was actually the very first time that I ever actually saw who Black Mask was. I had no idea about this character before that. I know that he was in the Batman cartoon, the one that came out in 2003, I believe, 2004. So he was a figure. He was one of the, it's like you don't really think of him when you think of the Rogues Gallery. He's not, he's one of the newer characters, but I like that you have one of those fantastical kind of guys in the mob world in Batman now, because it's like he's not, you don't necessarily need to compare him to a guy like the Riddler or the Joker or Two-Face or anything like that. When you look at him, you got to think of people like Sal Maroni or Carmine Falcone or Rupert Thorne. You think of Black Mask, you think of those guys. So the fact that there is a quote unquote freak of nature in the mob world is kind of fun.
And I think it's a perfect choice based on kind of we see it first through flashbacks, but like the idea of Jason's realization that it's these like freak of nature villains that aren't afraid of Batman in the way that the street thugs are. I think it's really nice having someone who fills that lane of being the like crime family style Batman villain, but also on the side of that like freak of nature Batman family villain, which is perfect for what Under the Red Hood is trying to say about Jason's method versus Batman's method, to be kind of that linchpin. And it's that does actually make me think, if you guys don't mind me skipping just for a second, there's a specific panel I'd love to talk to you guys about that I just want to see how you felt about it. Because thinking about the fear that these, over the top villains have or don't have of Batman, for me, it's page 283. I don't know about you guys, but it's where Jason's kind of like interrogating Joker.
Yeah.
And he holds the knife really close to Joker's eye. And we get this extreme close up where all we can see is his eye. I think Joker's actually afraid in that panel. But I
There
was
were,
curious if you guys thought so, because I think it's left very vague. Because Jason has his attention and they are talking, but it's a level of open eye that we don't get in any other panel in that conversation, other than when he makes that face like, ugh.
I mean,
So I think he got to him.
I think he did too, because you can definitely even see in the film, and again, I really want to go very deep into that scene.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like when he finds out who he is, like he's still being the Joker himself, but he is still very, very nervous because he seriously believes that he will kill him.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think that that's the other part where I take the film more favorably over the book, and that I think that at the very beginning, when Joker and Red Hood actually do connect, I think it comes off a little sloppier than the film, because I think the film adding the flashbacks of the Joker as the Red Hood, the fact that the Joker is interrogated in Arkham Asylum, also the whole scene with the crowbar, that's in the book. I think there's much more fluidity and more streamlined storytelling in the film when we get to that part. Because again, people who read Under the Red Hood have most likely read A Death in the Family. But a fresh comic book reader, if this is their first part, he's going to say, or she's going to say, why is the Red Hood hitting the Joker with a crowbar? And why, out of anything, a crowbar? We
Well, I
get
think,
that in the movie more because of that opening sequence.
well, and I think that's the writer's way of kind of giving the audience, the viewing audience, that respect of saying, it's okay if you don't read comics. I'm going to give you a little understanding. Here's some visualization, and maybe you can use those visuals to do your own research, because it obviously paints a picture, it tells a story, but it's not everything. But I think that as the comic reader, we don't need all of that, because we should know. I mean, granted, I'm the last person to talk because I certainly haven't read it all, and I'm on my own personal journey in the underground trying to figure it all out. But I do think that if you become engrossed in something, in which Batman has always been my favorite, I've read a lot more Batman stories, and I think that when you immerse yourself in something this lengthy, you should be a little bit more versed in Batman comics. You should have read certain comics, and I don't think that it's too much. I think it's just enough. At this point you should have already familiarized yourself with a lot of stories. But
I'll
that
defend
I don't know,
you.
maybe that's just me being
No,
a completist.
no. You're making a good point. Let me defend you to a certain degree here. I may not agree with you on what I think is better, but I'm definitely going to add to where you're coming from. Let's just think about if the reader got what the movie depicted and what we actually received. There's going to be an extremely different emotional response. So, because when the Red Hood picks up the crowbar in the movie, we already know it's Jason. In the book, we don't know. So the reader, the Batman purist, is going to be reading that scene and he's going to say, no way. Is that Jason? Is that Jason Todd? But if we already know and he picks up that crowbar, it's a similar emotional response, but it's more so of, oh no, he's going to go down that route.
Yeah, it's
He's actually
interesting
going to
because
kill
it
him.
does evoke something. Both ways does evoke something. In the comic, it's very for the reader who doesn't know where this is going and they think, oh shit, is that Jason? And in the movie, it's for the reader who goes, oh, that's I know where this is going. Nowhere good. You know what? I will say, Cammy, I think I largely agree with you. The thing that I'll add, which doesn't even change anything about what you said, is that I think it's really okay to have stuff in, especially comics, where there's like this intense continuity where you really can't expect every reader to have full continuity. Even though Death in the Family is such a major one, it's kind of safe to assume people have, at least the people who are reading it while it was coming out, are familiar enough to get those. I think it's okay for your audience of any work of art to not understand what you're doing. I think I just this is like a philosophical and art thing, but I think it is okay to have something that the audience doesn't get, both in the sense that it can make something magical or extra meaningful for the people who do, and it can add layers to something when you return to it at a different point in your life. The same way that any work that you read, whether it's entirely self-contained or not, depending on where you are as a person or in the world, can impact you differently. I think that coming into it with knowledge, prior knowledge or lack thereof, and having it the second time is a rewarding and a refreshing feeling that only art can give us. So I personally, to take it back to Under the Red Hood, do enjoy in the comic not having the intense link to Jason from the get-go, of where this is going to go. But granted, of course, the movie coming out years after the comic has a little bit of people probably kind of know this story, or like a commercial or the back of the box is going to apply Jason Todd at some point. So there's less of a like keep this guarded. And look, I'm reading Under the Red Hood knowing exactly who is under the Red Hood this time around, right? Um, but nevertheless, I think just in a vacuum, whether you're talking about someone who magically has never heard any of this before and reads the comic, or someone who has time traveled and they're reading it the way it was originally released in its serialized fashion, I think it's really okay to have stuff that goes over a certain audience member's head. The work is certainly still enjoyable. So I don't mean to be too tangential, but like this is like a really great example to talk about that, because we talk about comic continuity all the time. So just to like put my 2 cents out there about what it means, and this should also be like, I think, comforting to a new reader who's like kind of getting into comics with us or finding these videos. It's so okay to not get everything in comics, and you're not really missing out. And there's going to be some richness that you will discover later, like if you follow our Ultimate Journey videos, but like you'll still get a fantastic experience out of these good stories even without that prior knowledge. You
I
just
think
will.
the only people who get very upset about being thrown out of the loop in comics are people that just haven't read comics in a while and really want to get back into them. Like me. I knew that, because trust
I
me,
can only talk about us. We're the one, we're the ones here.
I will fully admit one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to get back into comics so bad was because of watching all those goddamn special features on all these DC animated film DVDs. That was when I learned about Blackest Night. That is when I learned about Identity Crisis. I'm like, oh my God, what God's name am I missing? I got to get back into comics in some shape or form. And here we are. So the reveal of Jason Todd, similarly, some not completely different situations for both. I think that's the one thing that I don't necessarily think is a weakness that the film has, but I think it just is a little bit on the anticlimactic side. And maybe that's just because of the amount of time the film is. You can't really, I mean, if it was 20 minutes longer, maybe it would have been a little bit more of something else. But I think the one big flaw that I think the film has is Batman revealing that it's Jason too early.
I mean, I was trying to think about how quickly it happened. Sorry, my brain.
So not it takes a little bit, it takes a little time in the book, but he does still discover that it's Jason a little early on.
Yes, but I mean, I think the book does it better
I
because
agree with
we
you.
have such a rich history of the whole backstory. It's a back and forth. I feel there's a lot of looking back and looking ahead. Where are we now? And I kind of wish the movie would have done that a little bit more, because I feel like the pacing for the movie was just a little bit too fast for my liking. And I think that because of the complexity of this story, because of how deep I feel this story really touches on some characters and the relationship between some characters, and it's not just one pairing. I mean, there's multiple pairings. I mean, you could take this across the board from villain versus villain to just the simplicity of Jason and Batman. But I feel like the movie is just too quick. It touches on all these points, and it's, again, not a lot to digest, which is good for a movie pacing. But when you have a rich story as a reader, you feel like you've been cheated. And that's kind of, I think, how I felt, and why it leaves such a not as impressionable feeling. Like I walk away feeling, okay, yes, it was okay, but it wasn't a great film. It's not going to go down as one of my favorite animated DC films of all time, because I feel like there's a lot of elements missing, as the reader in me will always yell from the back, like the back row of the movie theater. No, there's more. There's more to the story, kids.
I try to put myself in my shoes of the first time I watched the movie, since I hadn't read it the first time. And I know I did find it impactful, but I think it's just one of those things that just In the movie, I feel like the reveal loses potency more than the reveal loses potency in the comic.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't even think I really fault the movie for that, though.
Oh.
I think it just comes with the territory of what the medium is and the length of it, like we're talking about. So the reveal, I do give the nod to the comic, but it's one of those ones where it's like I don't think I'm assigning points here for this one, because I think since there's more build to it in the comic, there's more story around it, and like you kind of know that it being Jason is a huge deal when you first read it, but overall, on a return to this story, it's so much more about like the grief and responsibility people have to one another, that I don't think the comic loses all that much in losing the mystery, because this is not, to compare to another story we've talked about in this show, this doesn't feel to me like the Long Halloween. Like the Under the Red Hood doesn't feel like a story that is the mystery who done it. It feels like this is a character and layers get pulled back and get revealed and things get deeper and more emotional to what this story is beyond a couple of drug lords fighting. There's so much more going on here. Whereas in Long Halloween, it's like really kind of all who done it, right? And I think that for that reason, I like the comic on this a little bit better, but it's just not actually the core of the story beyond an initial shock. There's so much more to Under the Red Hood, which is great. And that is something I do want to make sure I say, and I think we've all said and feel, is that to anyone who's interested in these stories, wants to take a look at them, know that if you're someone who got into the animated universe and is like, is this comic worth my time? It is, because this story truly doesn't just revolve around who is Red Hood. And once that's resolved, you don't really got to read it. This is a much more important story than just that, even though that's big.
Absolutely.
I want to say that.
And then there was that fight in the alley with the bounty hunters that are trying to get Red Hood. And they changed it around for the film. Again, insignificant for me as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if Judd Winnick was trying to do a little tribute to Batman Beyond because they looked like Batman Beyond villains in the film, but I liked the name. What was it? The Fearsome Hand of Four? I liked that idea, but that was insignificant. But I did want to mention that because that is the actual change. We get the same end game from that moment in the comic and in the book, which I liked. But again, I said this at the very beginning. My biggest gripe with the book was that it felt a little too much. It didn't have to be as epic as it was. And here's the reason why. There's an additional mystery that shows up after Batman discovers the Red Hood is Jason Todd. But he wants to know, how is Jason alive? So he reaches out to other heroes and asking them what happened to you, because these were people that died. So Batman talks to Green Arrow. He talks to Superman. That's not in the movie because Batman is not really going deep into that mystery, but the mystery is revealed to me personally in a more condensed form that actually makes sense with the film with Ra's al Ghul. That piece of the story is also at the end of the book in the annual issue, and I will say I hate that ending. I hated that last issue. It was so boring to me.
Yeah, I do want to jump in to say specifically with, I think it's completely fine cutting, the talking to all the heroes and stuff. I really do love the moment though, with Green Arrow specifically, where Batman says, you don't care for me, you always have this rage for me. He's like, I know I've never done anything to you. I think you're mad at me because of something you did to me. I love that.
No. I want to say that for the comic's sake, though, it's cool to see these characters. I mean, when you take a story like Hush, Superman is in that story, but he's also in the animated film to a small degree. But the other thing, and this is just me splitting hairs here, this is me going on a rant about the Thor movie because he didn't wear his helmet. You know, that's something that I always yell about. But the scene where we get the flashback where Jason is helping Batman in a caper, the fact that they were foiling a crime by Captain Boomerang in the book, why are they going up against a character that's not in Batman's rogues gallery? Where are they? Did Batman actually take Jason to Central City? He put them in Gotham in the film, and they foiled in the exact same way. Same words, same jokes that Jason was saying, but it was the Riddler. That just made more sense to me. Plus, he gets to say that great joke. What's green but covered in red and yellow? You, when I land on your sorry butt. Like, I love that scene. It's in the book too, but I just like it in the film more. It just makes you feel like a kid again.
I agree with Andy. I don't think that the superheroes not being a part of the film and having cameos isn't necessary. I don't think that it really did anything, but I do think if they were going to give any light, any airtime to any of those superheroes, it would have been Zatanna, because that segues into the Ra's al Ghul story.
Right.
I think that there was a little bit of a conversation that they had, and it really wasn't even much in the comic that expressed the reason why Ra's al Ghul was there in the first place. It kind of gives the illusion as to how Jason Todd came back to be and all of these things. So I think that would have given a little bit of explanation. Again, not necessary. It doesn't drive the story. It doesn't carry it. So missing it isn't an end all be all. But I also like Zatanna, so just to see her anytime on film is awesome. I became more familiar with her when we got into the Constantine films and the Dark Side of DC.
Oh, of course.
So,
Justice League Dark is such a great movie.
Yes. You said we are going to have a little bit more discussion about the scene between Jason and Joker, right?
Oh, of course. That's coming very soon.
Because there was something Andy said that I wanted to touch on, but if we're going to talk about it, I'll wait.
Again, I didn't mention this earlier, but I am going to say something right now. I have watched this movie at least 50 times. I love this movie so much. So yes, I'm not going to lie. I'm coming at this with bias if you haven't picked that up yet. It's just that these characters and the voices that are given to these characters in these films, it's like, I'm thinking of those moments while I'm reading the pages of those books, like every single minute as I'm turning. It's like the voice of Ra's al Ghul in the film is the great Jason Isaacs. And I love how he tells the story. That's the thing. Batman doesn't get told this story. I also like how Ra's al Ghul in the movie gives a whole extra dimension to a death in the family. I loved that. I loved the fact that it's not just giving us a great brand new Batman story, but it's really trying to tie it very close to where it all started. Andy, and I even told you this, one of my favorite movies is Back to the Future. I love the second film. One of the other major reasons, besides the whole concept of alternate realities, I love the part towards the end that Marty is literally viewing the first film from a different point of view. The fact that we're seeing a death in the family told in a different point of view. It's just a great idea.
Well, and the context was changed, I think, on a lot of elements, not on just death in the family, but you also do have bits of Hush in there. You do have bits of Identity Crisis in there,
Yes.
which does play nod to the reader, but it also doesn't smother the film goer. You know, you have to kind of balance that when you're creating a movie. You don't want to put so much story in there that the moviegoer is confused, because they're obviously going there for a specific dialogue, specific characters. And if you bring in too many elements from other stories, it can be very overwhelming, you know, even for a reader sometimes. So that I can appreciate, although the context was changed, it made sense for the movie. And where a reader, we're going to look a little bit deeper into it, or we're going to kind of make the connections, because chances are, like we've alluded many times in this conversation, you've probably read those books, you know?
And then we get to the truly unchanged scene. Maybe as a matter of fact, a teensy bit changed. The dialogue is a little smoother in the film. I think there's a few extra words, but it's the final showdown, the reveal where Jason gives his true purpose and why he was doing all of this. It wasn't just to get to Joker. It was also to a certain degree to get to Batman, because the scene, it's in the book, it's in the movie. He's like, Bruce, I forgive you for not saving me, but why on God's earth? And he smashes the door down, and there's the Joker bound on a chair, and he goes, is he still alive? Like, that's just, and that's the other thing I didn't get a chance to say. Jensen Ackles as Jason. That's what makes the film version of this whole piece of the book so much more powerful.
If it had been you that he'd beat to a bloody pulp, if he had taken you from this world, I would have done nothing but search the planet for this pathetic pile of evil death-worshipping garbage and send him off to hell.
It's perfect. But I think it's just because of the fact that I've seen that scene in film versions so many times that it just resonates with me more. But I think it also made my experience of the reading that much more complete, because I knew what it was supposed to sound like. I mean, it's interesting because it's like when I was reading the Harry Potter books for the first time, there were no movies. So I was doing it, I was making up my characters all along. But then when I got to the Goblet of Fire, and I knew that there was a movie coming out, and then I get to Order of the Phoenix, and I'm reading those pages, all I can hear are all those actors doing those voices. Same thing when I read Lord of the Rings. I mean, you can't read Lord of the Rings, even though I'm pretty sure this scene is not in the book. I don't believe Gandalf yells, "You shall not pass," in the book. So, but again, the point that I'm making here is once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. It's like you take the Chicago Bulls logo and you flip it upside down. It's a robot reading a book on a table. You cannot unsee that anymore. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I said that because I know that Cammie is a big Chicago Bulls fan, everybody.
I just hadn't heard that since middle school, so it just made me chuckle.
You know who told, something I didn't know about that until I was in my 30s.
I've been a Chicago Bulls fan my entire life, so
no, but
I've heard that more
but
than
you see what I'm saying? It's like when you've seen it, it's also sometimes there are movies that I will see, and I know that they are based on excellent books. But if I love that movie so damn much, I don't want to pick up that book. Because
that's how I feel about everything Jane Austen ever wrote. All I need to do is see the movie.
Because I have a feeling I'm gonna hate that movie now. My go-to example all the time, David Fincher's Gone Girl. The movie is phenomenal. I know the book is wonderful, but I do not want to read it because I am terrified I will hate the movie.
But as a reader first, because I was a reader before I was a moviegoer, I have to read it for myself, because I do still feel that there are so many elements in books that you don't often see translated into the movie. There's so much. I mean, you mentioned Harry Potter. There's so much in even the first film that doesn't make its way onto screen. And there's so many funny things that happen in the first book. I mean, I literally laughed out loud with the first book, and it's a different experience, and it should always be that way.
Absolutely.
But I don't want it to always shape my mind. And I think that's a big issue with society now as it is shaped, is that we are so engrossed in technology and in our phones, and we have so much leaked to us ahead of time, with trailers, and trailers are even getting more and more expansive. I remember trailers as a kid gave you this much, and you wanted to go and see the movie. Now, if you kind of just follow, different people that do movies and stuff like that, you get almost the whole movie, and there's so much that's ruined for you because even if they don't tell you it's a spoiler, it ends up being a spoiler, you
And
know?
that's why
So
Hollywood is in the crapper right now.
no, Hollywood is in the crapper because Hollywood isn't making movies.
That's the other reason.
are
Okay. That's one of the many reasons.
this is a conversation for another day, Stephen. Do not get me heated and on the Hollywood conversation because
I will
I am in
embrace
my
the
happy Batman
conversation
zone
when it
right now.
comes. I will embrace it when it comes, Cammy. You know I will. Because I'm probably going to agree with most of what you're going to say.
Probably, I would agree with
Maybe
that.
not necessarily as much as in this case today, but definitely on the other topic.
But while we're here in this conversation about this particular scene, I do want to touch back on something Andy had said where he had made mention of that panel where you get that visualization of his eye. I think in that moment we do feel the fear of the Joker, but it's funny because the most impactful thing happens for me on the next page in the second panel where you get that moment where Jason Todd takes the smile off of his face. And that for me is more powerful than anything in that moment, because the Joker relishes on the laughter, the smiling, the antagonizing in his laughter. And when he removes the smile from his face, the power that that gives Jason in that moment, he doesn't need to take his life. He just took the smile off his face. And that to him means way more. And you know, don't get me wrong, it starts with what Andy said. It definitely, you can see the fear, you can see the tension building when you get the eyeball because the knife is right there. And you're like, is he going to do it? Is he going to kill him? He's got the opportunity, you know, tit for tat right here, right now. And it doesn't happen. But I think that, you know, the yin to the yang kind of thing where you see a little bit of good in Jason Todd in that moment is he could make that decision right then and there. But like Batman, it's too easy. He hasn't fulfilled what he set out to do in that moment. It would be too easy in that moment to just, you know, pin that knife right through his eyeball and end his life. He has more to say to him. And I think that is always been the grapple with Batman. That's why Batman hasn't taken him out, because Batman knows inevitably, yes, it would end a lot of things for a lot of people. But it also would segue into exactly what the Joker wants. He is so miserable in his own existence. He is trying everything in his power to make his life as whimsical and just you know, crazy, evil, weird, happy. I don't know how to fully articulate what I think the madness inside his brain is, but a lot of what he does, I think, is for the expression, you know, for the feeling on the other side of the house, like how is this person going to react to the crazy that I'm doing? And so Batman never satisfies the crazy by ending his life, because that would make it easy. That's what he wants. He wants to exit this world. He wants to be rid of his mind. His mind is his worst enemy. He wants it all to go away. He wants the laughter to stop.
And at the same time, he also wants Batman to break his code, because he knows that if Batman kills him, he will know that he has truly won.
But that's why I say, and I've said this in so many of our Batman conversations, that is why I feel the Joker is the best villain for Batman, because they exist because of each other. They know each other's strengths, they know each other's weaknesses. And I think that's what makes this part of the story, and really the underlying crux of the whole writing of this particular tale under the Red Hood, that Batman realizes Jason is his alter ego in this. He sees the truth. He sees the reality. He understands it. But even as he's explaining why he didn't avenge him in that moment, it still doesn't make sense to Jason, because Jason's like, no, it should be crystal clear. It should be the easiest decision you ever made. If I was that important to you, if you felt a fraction of what you expressed that you felt when you knew I was dead, that should have been the easiest part of this. That should have been the reason why you finally said it's time. And he just doesn't understand Batman, because there's no rationale when it comes to someone who is gone, you know. And I really feel that because we do know how Jason Todd came back to be, there was something wrong, you know. There was a little tick off in him. But Batman even expresses it further when we kind of take a look back. There was always something wrong with Jason Todd. He was always off. And so this just amplified it. And it's heartbreaking and heartwarming all in the same breath. And that is why I love the comic so much more, because you get so much more dialogue in this between all three characters. It's very well depicted in the movie, but it's so much more badass in the comic.
I think that the other thing is like when it goes back to when Batman just says to him, he says, "You don't understand. I don't think you ever understood." And that hits Jason to his core, because it sort of makes him realize that I was truly never appreciated by you. I was never trusted by you. Why did you give me this life in the first place if at the end of the day you always doubted me?
I'm left thinking about how Jason doesn't kill the Joker. I'm really, something that lingers with me there, that's really interesting when we talk about, the fear that the Joker has and the seriousness that Jason has about, like, you are so far from right, you're not even on the same like universe as the continent of right, the country of right. But he holds back in order to make a point to Batman about being willing to cross a line. And I find that really interesting to think on, because there's something about Jason Todd as Red Hood. Of course, we've seen him actually kill people, so we know that he's open to killing. But
carry guns, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, but the Joker does live through this story, right? So like, it, as much as there's the "I don't think you understand, I don't think you ever understood," here we are with a living Joker. And I think that implies some complexity there that I don't think Jason understands. And he definitely doesn't understand, because Batman is left with the questions of like, how much of this is Jason? How much of this is the Lazarus pit? How much, like, there's all of these things. How much is it the actual wound he received? So Batman is left with all those really credible questions. But then he says, "I don't think you ever understood." And it's like, well, maybe he did, but it's one of these, mitigating factors here. And then you thought maybe he did, because here we are at the end with a live Joker. And it does leave me feeling like Batman might be missing the forest for the trees a little bit, even though Jason kills a lot of people in this story. But he doesn't kill the Joker. And it's probably harder for him to not kill the Joker than it is to kill all the people he killed, which makes it so interesting that he would still make the mistake of saying, "It's just so hard for you to cross that line." And Batman reminds him, "No, it would be so easy for me to cross that line."
And again, now I'm going to go into the comics, because I know we've all read this one.
Yes.
He should have killed the Joker. And I'll tell you why. Because then he wouldn't have gotten his mind totally screwed by the Joker, actually causing him to kill him, or at least one of him, in Batman the Three Jokers. In the end, Jason Todd did kill the Joker.
Yeah, I've been thinking about Three Jokers a lot while we've been talking about this
that
story, just like as a whole.
Special, man.
Yeah.
Kevin, you read it, I believe.
I did. I read it actually after I watched the two of you discuss it.
Yeah, that's that scene with the Joker.
That was actually my second Batman. I read The Long Halloween first, and then I read The Three Jokers. So I went deep, but I went old fast.
Yeah, that scene, I think now that I've read all the major stories, I've read A Death in the Family years ago. I read Under the Red Hood. I think it just makes that scene in The Three Jokers that much more complete.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like that's, I mean, like, we're not even supposed to be talking about this book. It was actually the first must-be-read episode we ever did.
Yeah.
When I first built this channel, and we talked about that, Andy and I, in great detail because of how intense that scene was.
Yeah.
And the things that Joker said to get under Jason's skin that badly to the point that he actually killed him.
Yeah.
That was intense, man.
We talk
That
about
was
the
just some
things
intense reading.
that make me like a story is what lingers with me when I think back on what it meant and how it made me feel. And like that's definitely a Three Jokers lingering moment for me.
Yeah. We're clearly getting to the end here. I think it's safe to say that our opinions are going to stand where they are. I don't think anybody's getting swayed, and that's absolutely fine. As a matter of fact, I like the fact that at the end of this episode, we're going to agree to disagree in
I
certain
also will
ways,
say
shape, and
my
form.
opinion also hasn't changed. Like I don't feel like way more confident I like the comic better. I still am like right where I was of this is really a great movie that I highly recommend. It's just I err towards the comics, and a lot of what I have to say that emotionally resonates with me comes from the comic. I don't mean for that to detract from how I feel about the movie. I really do think it's one of
No.
the best DC animated films I've ever seen.
I just think it's the perfect package because it's beautiful. I mean, I think Cami can agree with me because we've discussed a lot of the last few DC animated films. I think that there was a massive downgrade in animation over the
Oh God.
years. And
Oh yeah.
I will say that when the earlier DC Universe movies were coming out, the animation was just absolutely gorgeous. So
Mhm.
you take that with a great story and you give all these characters a voice for this piece of cinema, and it literally is everything that you could ever want in a Batman film. And I personally will say that even though there are so many live action Batman films out there, I always go back to a large chunk of the animated films because there's just something about them. Maybe it's just the fact that, as the great Walt Disney once said, animation can explain anything the mind of man can conceive. You know, maybe it's that. Maybe it's just because of the fact that in the world of animation, you can get more fantastical and you can bring the unbelievable into the fray and make it believable for the viewer's eyes. I don't know. Or maybe it's just, is it Bruce Timm? Is it Andrea Romano? It's something about every single one of these people that goes all the way back to 1991. And they said, we're going to bring DC, eventually the entirety of DC, to the world of animation for generations to see and enjoy. And this is just one of the pieces. And I think it's one of the best pieces in the world of Batman and animation. And I
I
think
think
that's
it's
why.
important for future generations, but again, I'm all about timing too. Don't rush things. Make sure, it's something that you cover the bases, because if you miss the big things, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here, because we have discussed some elements, like the missing superheroes, for example, that didn't kill it. But I think there are some elements of this story that are deeper that we could have gotten more of in the cinematic, animated world of it. But for the sake of time and budgeting, I don't know what the budget looked like for it either. It is where it landed. I think the importance, though, is that these do get made into animated films because we're not always going to have readers on the other side. So for people to be able to experience this in that way is still a very important element for any appreciator of this world or this universe that's been created for us.
And I also feel that, when people ask about great Batman stories, this one's not necessarily mentioned. And I feel that in this day and age where we are with DC Comics, it's very important because Red Hood has been put in the pages of comics. He's had his own book a couple of times. He's been featured as a member of the Bat family now in so many different recent Batman stories. So to not even be recommended how it all began is just wrong, you know?
I think it depends on what side of the coin you're on, though, because I think that if you are so inundated with the popular Batman stories, you're going to be inundated with the same villains, you know? So I think that in order to be exposed to things like this, and which you're saying, you know, let's recommend it more, let's put it out there and talk about it, which we're doing now. But I think that you have to have a vested interest in it, because I know, like, for me as a comic reader, I will pick something up, and if I don't like the cast of characters, I'm not going to go seek them out in other stories. And I feel that Jason Todd kind of has a love-hate relationship with audiences of the DC world, you know, and that stands to reason with people voting him to die, you know. I think that if this story is going to be recommended from one comic enthusiast to the next, it is a need to express your own passion for it, your own joy in having read this story. I think the beauty of this comic and why it should be shared with future generations, though, is because of the other characters aside from our main characters. I think you do get a feel for other villains and other backstories, and why the comic is still my favorite, because you don't have so much backstory that it overtakes the story, but just enough to get you intrigued. Like, okay, who's Deathstroke, and you know what's that world about, you know? And I love it when comic books do that, when they give you just enough to get your curiosity stoked, but they don't overwhelm you with information to take away from the main event.
I forgot Deathstroke was in the book. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's going to wrap it up, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment in the box below. Let us know if you've read this book, what do you think we missed anything. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're up to date with our latest videos. We have one more piece of the Batman celebration coming towards the end of the year, and I don't think we could be ending on a better note. Not going to tell you guys what it is. You'll just have to wait and see. And in the meantime, thank you very much, and we will see you in the next one.